Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into an absolutely stunning 1863 edition of a classic text that literally shaped moral philosophy for centuries. I mean, if you've ever wondered how deep philosophical insights, gorgeous poetry, and hardcore language learning could all be packed into one single volume, well, you're definitely in for a treat. Just take a look at this vintage 1863 title page. It introduces our main subject, the Gulistan. Written by Sheikh Saadi of Shirazi, this is a truly foundational work of global literature. And what's wild is this specific edition was printed in Hartford and published in London and Edinburgh. It just goes to show you how far this text traveled from its Persian roots. Now, before we get into the heavy details, let's just look at the title itself. Gulistan literally translates to rose garden or flower garden, and Saadi chose this intentionally. It sets up this beautiful metaphor for the whole experience of the book. Navigating through it, it's like taking a walk through a vibrant garden, cultivating, appreciating, and ultimately gathering up these timeless pieces of wisdom, almost as if you were plucking roses.
So, here's our roadmap for today. First, the Prince of Moralists. Second, a captive's ransom. Third, Inside the Rose Garden. Fourth, a Persian textbook. And finally, bridging East and West.
Part 1. The Prince of Moralists. Okay, according to the biographical preface here, Saadi lived an absolutely astonishing life. He lived to be roughly 120 years old. Born in Shirazi around 1175 AD, his life was chunked into these very distinct eras. He spent his first 30 years just intensely acquiring knowledge. Then, during his middle age, he traveled vast distances across Asia, literally from the Nile all the way to the Ganges, and he made the pilgrimage to Mecca 14 times. Finally, he devoted the last 30 years of this incredibly long life to solitude and religious contemplation.
Part 2. A captive's ransom.
But those decades of travel weren't always smooth sailing. While on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, Saadi was actually captured by crusaders. And it gets worse. He was put to hard labor, literally forced to dig in the trenches of Tripoli. Just imagine that for a second. This great scholar, a man destined to become one of history's most revered poets, subjected to grueling slavery.
But here's where it gets kind of funny. He was eventually ransomed by a wealthy merchant from Aleppo for 10 pieces of gold. This merchant then marries Saadi off to his daughter, throwing in a dowry of 100 pieces of gold. But, as the book points out, this lady was a seriously nagging wife who sorely tested the poet's patience. One day, trying to insult him, she snaps, "Art thou not he whom my father redeemed from captive for 10 dinars? And Saadi, being the absolute master of words, fires back with this legendary comeback. "Yes, he redeemed me for 10 dinars, and sold me into thy hands for 100. Just brilliant.
Part 3. Inside the Rose Garden.
All right, let's step out of the history and into the text itself. The Gulistan is structured like a rich tapestry. It's not just some dry instructional manual. Saadi really wanted to elevate the character of his countrymen and guide them toward probity and honor. And he does this using excellent moral precepts. But instead of just lecturing you, he weaves these engaging prose narratives embellished with poetry. He's teaching deep human virtues like humility, justice, and contentment. And he perfectly balances the richness of the Persian language with this incredible harmony of poetry and prose. He wraps complex moral philosophy in a simplicity and chasteness of style that makes the lessons totally unforgettable. Now, what makes this specific 1863 edition so fascinating is that it's more than just a reading book. It's a highly intensive study guide. It features this massive, incredibly detailed vocabulary section put together by Francis Johnson. It was specifically designed to help English-speaking learners crack the code of Saadi's beautiful language.
Part 4. A Persian textbook.
By analyzing that vocabulary list in the back of this source, we can get a real feel for how 19th century students actually learned. They'd start with foundational words. Gul means rose or flower. Add istan and boom, you get Gulistan, the rose garden. They learned bezurg for great or venerable, and atash for fire or heat. But mastering these words wasn't just rote memorization. It was the key to slowly unlocking those deep philosophical metaphors hidden inside the garden. Learning the word for fire or flower gave them the actual tools to understand Saadi's broader meditations on human mortality, beauty, and virtue.
Notice how intricately this edition breaks down the language. The editor actually points out that earlier versions offered very little help with the purely Arabic parts of the text, and there are a lot of them. So this vocabulary section meticulously tags words with an A for Arabic or a P for Persian. It makes the complex interplay of these two languages totally accessible and super educational for the student.
Learning this language was undoubtedly hard work, but the payoff was massive. The textbook uses Saadi's distinct, chaste style as the perfect educational vehicle. As the editor so eloquently puts it, the ultimate reward for the student's patience is the privilege of appreciating the force and marking the beauties of rhythm and alliteration of the original text. You put in the hard work with the vocabulary, and your reward is experiencing those profound philosophical lessons with the actual music of Saadi's true voice, a voice that has a real, powerful charm for the ear.
Part 5. Bridging East and West.
So stepping back, the Gulistan enjoys this absolutely fascinating dual legacy. Throughout Asia, his works formed the foundational textbooks for beginners wherever the Persian language was studied. It was a highly practical, everyday educational tool. But simultaneously, it completely captivated Europe, where it was treated as highly prized literature, inspiring multiple translations that tried to capture its unique magic.
And the European public had known about it for a while. Over 200 years before our edition, a scholar named Olarius translated it into German. Then, closer to 1863, Professor Eastwick works tirelessly to translate the poetical portions into English verse for the very first time. The text actually praises Eastwick for not just translating the literal meaning, but for successfully capturing a good measure of Saadi's original spirit and raciness for an English audience.
Honestly, the very existence of this robust, meticulously compiled 1863 edition is proof in itself. More than 6 centuries after Saadi was born, his words were still actively bridging cultures. His moral precepts and linguistic beauty were considered so vital that an entire infrastructure, printing, translation, vocabulary building, was dedicated to making sure his rose garden kept blooming in the West.
To wrap up this explainer today, I want to leave you with a thought taken directly from the Arabic passages translated right in the appendix of this book. As you think about Saadi's incredible, enduring legacy, a guy who spent 120 years learning, traveling, suffering captivity, and writing, just ponder this profound proverb: every vessel distills what it contains. Saadi filled his vessel with wisdom, and he distilled a rose garden that has lasted for centuries. So what kind of knowledge are you cultivating today, and what will your vessel leave behind? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.